Well, welcome everybody to this, hopefully which will be a dialogue, because we hope that you'll be asking ʻniːl some questions. Well, I have to introduce ʻniːl. You all know who ʻniːl is, right? I'll just go through it because
there might be somebody here.
Yeah, I'm going to read the prepared script. There's really nothing I can say about him that hasn't been said before, or what he won't say about himself by the time we're done. He is one of the country's leading science spokespersons at a time really when our country needs them. And it's very good that he does do these things. He is head of the world-famous Hayden Planetarium. You can see him on TV. He has his own TV program, Nova Science Now. And he frequents other TV shows like Jon Stewart and the Colbert Report. And every once in a while you show up as a cameo, don't you, on cable someplace, in a drama. No. Okay, we'll get it.
Just once.
Once. You did
it was
that
a slip.
It was a slip. Okay. He's author of many books, too many to go through at the moment, but this is his latest book that we're all hoping you will buy. It's called The Pluto Files, The Rise and Fall of America's Favorite Planet. ʻniːl Tyson. deGrasse Tyson, welcome to this discussion.
Yeah,
yes,
thank you.
Please.
No, thank you.
Well, it's like a breakfast cereal, America's favorite planet. I mean, why is Pluto America's favorite planet?
I thought long and hard about that.
Did you?
I've tried to understand it, and I only arrived at one conclusion. It was clear once I hit this conclusion that it's all about the dog. It's the dog. I have no other accounting for it, because Europeans don't care, the South Americans don't care, Canadians don't care. You go to Americans, you say Pluto's about to be demoted, they're ready to fight. And because the dog, Mickey's dog, Pluto.
Right here, as shown in the book.
Oh, I'm photographed with Pluto.
You photographed with Pluto because you felt you needed to.
I felt that having such an accountability for Pluto's demotion, which we might get to if we go there,
later, yeah.
that I felt I ought to do a pilgrimage to Disneyland. Well, actually, that was Disney World in Florida, and so I went to Pluto's doghouse, because you can visit Pluto. And so I whispered in his ear that I was the first one to sort of publicly demote the planet to a dwarf. And then he went, now, they just have unchanging painted faces on. So the fact that he did this told me that it was a surprise face compared with the...
Stanislavski.
Yeah, it was just...
Okay. Yeah.
So then I got on my knees and begged forgiveness, and then it was all okay. And that picture in the book was the fourth in a set of pictures. We didn't have room to put all four, with me whispering and then me on my knees, and then, but we're pals now. So Pluto was okay with it, it turns out. But think about it. When do you first learn about the planets? You learn about it in early elementary school. And if you're a normal kid, or an average kid, you also know your cartoon characters. And you haven't yet learned Roman mythology. So as the teacher, no, listen, I'm serious. So as the teacher enumerates the planets in sequence, Mercury, you're not thinking winged messenger god of Roman antiquity. It's just a word to you when you're in first grade or third grade. And Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. And then, yeah, there it is, Pluto. And the connection is made in the American brain in elementary school, and it never separates long into adulthood. So I think that's what accounts for America's love affair with Pluto, because there are smaller round objects in the solar system. Nobody got excited about them. The biggest asteroid is smaller than Pluto, and it's round. You crying over that? It's named Ceres. You probably never even heard of it, right? Asteroid Ceres, C-E-R-E-S, named for the Roman goddess of harvest and agriculture. And the root for the word cereal comes from planet Ceres.
Wow.
Yeah. But you're not upset. I don't hear you like running around with placards declaring what should or shouldn't happen to Ceres. So I think it's really just the dog. That's my answer to your question.
Well, but in your book, I learned so much from the book, and one thing I learned from reading the appendix, I think it was the appendix, that the state of New Mexico, every time Pluto goes over the state, it becomes a planet again.
Yeah, New Mexico was the home state of Clyde Tombaugh, the discoverer of Pluto. And Clyde Tombaugh, now deceased, 10 years deceased or so, they felt they needed to protect his honor. So after they learned that the international community of astrophysicists voted in a way that we across the park at the American Museum of Natural History had decided back in 2000, they just felt they had to do something. So the legislature got together and created a resolution complete with all the whereas speak, you know, whereas Pluto is and whereas our native sun discovered Pluto, whereas we declare that you step into our state, no matter what else is true out there, Pluto's a planet in our state. These are like grown-ups behaving this way. That's the thing. It's not Miss McGillicuddy's third grade class making this declaration. This is tax money at work.
They have a lot of research in planets in New Mexico.
New Mexico, it turns out, is a state rich in observatories because it has very good observing conditions. Do you know the VLA, the Very Large Array Telescopes, a set of radio telescopes that are on grids, on tracks, that they're in practically every science fiction movie. You just see them all lined up moving. That's in New Mexico as well as a half dozen other observatories. So they wanted to sort of, so they felt like they had the right to assert this. But I think it's irrational.
Really?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, I mean, and you know that we're the only state. California got it right. California. I love doing that.
Why do I feel like Bud Abbott up here?
No.
Okay, that's okay.
In another pennant, California legislation relative to Pluto's planetary status. Now, you heard the reason why why New Mexico felt this way, because Clyde Tombaugh was their resident.
Right.
So they're just doing right by their man. Okay? Stand by your man. That's what they were doing. California, what excuse do they have? Whereas, this is California Assembly Bill H.R. 38, relative to Pluto's planetary status, introduced by Assembly members Keith Richmond, Republican, and Joseph Camellia, Democrat. There's bipartisan legislation here. So it starts out kind of like, okay, they're just trying to make a statement. Whereas recent astronomical discoveries, including Pluto's oblong orbit and the sighting of slightly larger Kuiper Belt objects, other icy bodies in the outer solar system, have led astronomers to question the planetary status of Pluto. Nothing wrong with that. It's a statement of fact. A little bit of education there, too.
All for it.
I'm cool. Mm-hmm. Then it says, and whereas the mean-spirited astronomers decided in August 24th to disrespect Pluto by stripping Pluto of its planet status and reclassifying it as a lowly dwarf planet. See, now that this is... What's that? Is it in the New Yorker? They say there'll always be in England, you know?
Right.
And that's weird. That there's always be a California, okay? Because I think they're just nuts in California. All right? And then it gets worse. It gets worse. Whereas Pluto, named after the Roman god of the underworld and affectionately sharing the name of California's most famous animated dog, has a special connection to California history and culture.
Walt Disney.
The cartoon character.
Absolutely. I've been on the E-Ride. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just saying here, can you imagine New York City elevating a cartoon character and then calling it our culture? But this is California. So
but you also said there was it Stephen Levy, somebody who said that they wanted to talk to Pluto first and assure it or get its okay Who was that? I can't remember who was in the book. Somebody.
No, because because the book has, I've got letters from school children who learned that we had reclassified Pluto back in 2000. Actually, it's not. They didn't learn that from us. They learned it from the New York Times. Okay, it took them a year, but they came out with a story after they looked more closely at our exhibit, because all we did was take Pluto and group it with the other icy objects recently discovered in the outer solar system. That's all we did. We said Pluto kind of looks more like these than either Pluto or they look like anything else. That's how you'd make a category, isn't it?
Absolutely.
All right. So no reason to be mad at us. New York Times, page 1 story. Page 1. Pluto not a planet? Only in New York. And that's when my life went to hell. That's it, right there, that headline. Page 1. Page 1. And what was particularly creepy about this was the date of that newspaper. January 22nd, 2001. What happened 2 days before that?
Election? Inauguration?
George W. just got inaugurated. You'd think that whole page would be filled with articles on the transition of power in Washington. But no, there was room for this article, the beginning of a 3-page article, Pluto not a planet. And that's when the hate mail started coming in from 3rd graders and other pissed off elementary school children that complained about our treatment of Pluto, disrespecting their favorite planet. And getting back to your point, the only difference between the letters from school children and that from grown-ups is that the grown-ups can spell better. Other than that, they're both filled with irrational emotion.
I'm glad you're not taking it personal.
I'm just saying.
Would you say most of your life now is filled answering this question?
No, it was for 6 years until the international community of astrophysicists basically agreed with what we did. We were the first public institution to do this. So we made it, it got notice when we did it. And then the international community figured it was time they had to sort of straighten this out, took an official vote, proposed what a new definition of the word planet would be, and Pluto does not qualify in that new definition. And that relieved some of the pressure, because now the whole community of astrophysicists was to blame, not just me.
So they just voted on what the definition of a planet
Yes, we voted.
They voted. That made it a planet, or it made it not a planet.
Yeah, because the first proposal, they created a planet naming committee.
They had some interesting names.
Okay, and so that committee, I saw who was on the committee. There's a bunch of Pluto lovers were put onto that committee. So I knew that whatever came out of that decision, Pluto was going to end up being a planet. So at the end, you know what their definition was? That got voted down and then a new one got put in. Their original definition was, are you round? You're a planet.
Not enough.
Yeah, so Pluto, yes, Pluto's round, but so is like the moon.
Right.
And there's a lot of round stuff out there. So we would go from 9 planets to like 35 planets. And my complaint was, so what good is the word to you anymore? If I say to you, I just discovered a planet, you're going to have to ask, well, was it big? Is it small? Does it have rings? Is it? We have to play 20 questions for you to have any understanding of what I'm talking about. If the very same word can include a small icy body and a huge gaseous object with rings, then the word is no longer useful. And so all we did at the museum was say, the word is no longer useful. It's time to reorganize this rich information we've now gleaned about objects in the solar system into a sensible lexicon, so you can have an intelligent conversation about what's actually going on in the solar system.
So what is the formal definition of a planet?
You need 3 checks.
3 checks.
3. First, are you round? Okay? Pluto gets a check in that box.
A lot of people could qualify.
That's right.
Okay.
No, you have to be...
okay, that's round. That's one thing.
You have to be gravitationally turned into a round object.
Well, I'd still say that.
Right, okay.
That's okay.
All right. 2, are you the principal object in orbit around the sun? This was the moon exclusion clause. Because if you orbit another object that's bigger than you, you're not the principal object. So we're not going to call you a planet. So that was the moon exclusion clause. Pluto has a moon, actually a relatively big moon, as moons go, but Pluto's still a little bit bigger than it. Pluto's the main one. Pluto gets a check in that box. Third category. Have you dominated your orbital zone? Pluto does not. Because out there, since the mid-1990s, we have discovered countless thousands of other objects orbiting the way Pluto does. Because you know, Pluto has all these weird properties in its orbit. It's elongated so that it crosses the orbit of Neptune. No other planet crosses anybody else's orbit. Planetary
so
orbit.
that sometimes it's not the furthest planet.
Exactly. In fact, for 20 years, between 1979 and 1999, Pluto was not the farthest most of the traditional 9 planets. Neptune was. Now, that's kind of that's that behavior that I think should be, you know, that's bad behavior.
Right.
You know, sneaking in front of another planet.
Yes.
That's not right.
Certainly in New York, that's found.
That's sneaking ahead of the line.
You get a lot of trouble.
That's you know, keep your place in line. Number one. Number two. Right. Pluto is really little. There's 7 moons in the solar system bigger than Pluto. I took straw polls continuously among Pluto lovers and asked how many of them even knew this fact. Consistently, half of them did not know, which tells me that this was suppressed information by the Pluto lobby. Now, also, Pluto, its orbit is tipped out of the plane of the solar system's, the rest of the orbits. So it's a really odd planet. Whereas if you look at the other icy bodies we've discovered, they have tipped orbits, they have elongated orbits, they're small, they're mostly ice, the way Pluto is mostly ice. So Pluto is not so much the 9th planet as it is a benchmark object in a new category, a new kind of object that orbits the solar system. And we call it the Kuiper belt of comets, named after, there was an astronomer at mid-century, a theorist, who hypothesized that beyond the orbit of the outermost large planet, if there's not another large planet out there to gravitationally vacuum up the debris would still be there. If you're far enough away from the sun, it would be icy. And so here's all these icy chunks. Pluto does not dominate that orbital zone. And so it gets an X there, not a check. And therefore, Pluto is not a planet. There's a new word for it. It's called a dwarf planet. And the Pluto lovers took umbrage at this because they felt that that was a demotion. And I thought, maybe it's just a kind of planet. Like if you drive a compact car, you're not driving saying, I'm not really driving a car. You know, you're not thinking this to yourself. You're just driving a compact. You park where it says compact car parking in the garage. But some people...
But astronomers like to use the word dwarf in their lexicon all the time.
We do it a lot. In fact, there's dwarf galaxies. One of my professional favorite interests are dwarf galaxies. We're not thinking it's not a galaxy.
Right.
And in fact, so it was only those with frail ego shared with Pluto
names here.
that felt that the dwarf really just kicked him out of the room.
I see.
Now, it turns out there's another term. Oh, by the way, by that rule, Ceres, that asteroid I told you, which is also round, that got elevated from just a simple asteroid to a dwarf planet status. It's the primary object, it's round, has not cleared its zone. It's littered with the rest of the asteroids in the asteroid belt. So we grew the number of dwarf planets. Now, if you're beyond Neptune and you're icy, there's another word for you. You're a Plutoid. A Plutoid. Now, some people don't like it.
That's different than dwarf planet.
If you are a dwarf planet beyond Neptune, you're a you're a Plutoid. Now, one of the big supporters of Pluto in the world, Alan Stern, doesn't like that word because he said it sounds like some kind of skin disease. You know, you have Plutoids. Oh, there's no medicine for that. You know, and I kind of agree. It does sound like something you got to go to the doctor for. Yeah, Plutoids. Get your Plutoids removed. Yes,
can't sit down. My Plutoids. So then is Pluto more like a comet then? Is it a comet? You said it's out there where the comets come from.
It's the Kuiper belt of comets. If you took Pluto, which is more than half ice by volume, and brought it to where Earth is right now, heat from the sun would evaporate that ice and it would grow a tail. Now that's, you know, if you're trying to be a planet and you got a tail sticking out, You know, we got words for things with tails. We call them comets. We got vocabulary for that. So it'd be a really big comet. It'd be the biggest there ever was. I mean, so maybe we need another vocabulary word for, by the way, most comets are not large enough for gravity to make them round. So this should create an argument not whether it's a planet or not, but what kind of new word would indicate this fact about it, that it's an icy body big enough for itself to be round. And that's where the discussion should be taking place. I'm speaking as an educator.
Well, you certainly are. You say that there should be 5 classes of objects. There are 5 classes.
For now, there might be more, but right now...
What are the classes of
Well, I don't have names for them because I'm not going to... I mean, we could invent them here and now, but I know which ones look like each other more than any one of them looks like anything else. The terrestrial planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, small, rocky, dense. The asteroid belt, craggy chunks of rock, all orbiting in a zone. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, big, low density, rings, gaseous. The Kuiper belt, small, cockamamie orbits, icy, in a belt. And then there's another zone, which we call a cloud. It's not really a cloud in the traditional sense. It's just that it's a reservoir of comets that completely surrounds the entire solar system that extends halfway to the nearest stars. And it's hypothesized to be there on extremely strong gravitational grounds. If you look at comets that come very close to the sun, they move very fast. When it's farthest away from the sun, it would move slowly.
Right.
Just count up how many comets come close to the sun that have really huge orbits. And to say, well, if I get 5 of these per decade, there must be trillions of them out there where they move really, really, really slowly out in the farthest reaches of the solar system. And this was hypothesized by a Danish astronomer named Jan Oort. So it's called the Oort cloud of comets. And you might give the sun its own category. Nothing looks like the sun in our solar system.
Right.
So that's all. And teach the solar system that way, not as some enumeration of objects that you memorize and have teachers giving exam questions that they think is science, like what is the name of the 5th planet from the sun? And then you go through your mnemonic, my very educated mother just, oh, it's just Jupiter, and get it marked right as though you just learned some science. That's not science. So I think part of, I think part of the irrational attachment went beyond the dog. It was because you learned it as some kind of compactified, closed system of information, rather than as a tapestry of discovery. Ooh, did that come out of my mouth? Did I just say that? Okay. Okay.
Do you think that we have teachers who can teach a tapestry of discovery?
I think teachers should rise to the occasion. And it's not that hard. I mean, I'm not asking them to teach the interior gravitational structure of these objects, but Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars are dense like rocks. So you bring in some rocks that has that kind of density. And the other ones are big and bulbous and low density. Bring in some beach balls, and you get a sense of density. Yes, it's a big word, but I think a 3rd grader can get the point. All right? And the big ones, give them all rings. They're things you can learn without just memorizing them and in sequence.
You can build that dirty snowball demonstration.
Yeah, build a dirty snowball. You got Pluto out there, and heat it, and you watch it evaporate. Get some dry ice. You see less of that today, but the ice cream vendor, inside there, the smoke that's coming out, that's dry ice, CO2. Pluto is most of the ice of Pluto is the same stuff that's inside the ice cream vendor's cart. Thank you. Right, not the ice cream itself, but that which is keeping it cold.
Right.
That would not be good to chew on some frozen
Bad
CO2.
experience.
That'd be bad.
You only do that once.
And right. And when you do it, you won't get to speak about it because your tongue. Talk about freezing your tongue to ice.
So we should go out and explore Pluto more then. Right?
We are. Yeah, we got a mission going there right now. Quickly launched before the vote was taken that demoted Pluto. By the way,
the clock is ticking.
They were worried that some of them were. They wouldn't admit to this, but I know it's true. They're worried that while they're getting funding for this mission to Pluto, that if Pluto was demoted to just a dirty ice ball, they would say, well, why are we spending billions and $1 billion to visit a dirty ice ball? So the slogans for this mission were, we must complete the reconnaissance of the 9 planets of the solar system. The first mission to the last planet. These were the slogans, and these slogans they're subterfuge.
You had to speak in the language Congress understands.
And so, but I would have said,
Yeah.
rather than the first mission to the last planet, well, let's complete the reconnaissance. Why not say, let's begin the reconnaissance of a new swath of real estate just discovered in the solar system? To me, that's a much more defensible posture as a scientist than claiming that I have found the final one and that's what I'm going to, and bada bing, what are you doing? It's not how science works. So that's how I knew that they were trying to retain a major planet status for this diminutive, dirty ice ball in the outer solar system.
Is that going to be the last probe that goes anywhere?
There's no probe funded at the moment going to the outer solar system. So that one, by the way, that was on the fast track. The probe is relatively small. Put it on the largest engines in our arsenal. So you put something low mass on big engines, it goes fast. This thing passed the moon in 6 hours, and it was hauling. And so because the rule is, I don't know if you knew this rule.
I'm waiting here.
The rule is, if you're a scientist and you're doing an experiment, the rule is you need the results of the experiment before you die, okay? That's a rule.
So you can get more funding while you're alive. I get it.
So, if you took the slow boat to Pluto, it would take 20 years or so, and you don't want that.
I hate it when that happens.
You hate it when that happens. So, this one, it was launched in 2006, and it'll get to Pluto in 2015. It'll be a flyby, though. So it's a 9-year mission, and you got to get your images as quickly as you can, and it'll go and explore other objects in the Kuiper Belt.
So that should be about the time the Chinese get to the moon, I think.
Actually, that's right. Chinese said send people to the moon. I think
People
they
to
want
the
to
moon,
send people to the
yes.
moon.
So
Yeah.
do you think we should be sending people to the moon?
I think so.
Yeah.
Back to the moon. I think so. I have reasons to defend that if you're interested. But
Go ahead.
yeah.
No, I'm very interested.
Oh, you want to go there now? We can go there now. But I'm just warning. It's an alert.
Let's go there now.
You want to go there now?
I only have another hour left. So
Okay.
it's going to take a while to get there, I think. At least 3 days. But
I wear multiple hats in life. If I put on my pure scientist hat, then there is no defensible reason ever to send human beings into orbit or into space. At all. If you're speaking as a pure scientist. Because whatever it costs to send a person, the problem is you have to feed them and they want to come back usually, little complications like that. They don't want to die on the way out there.
they get cranky out there.
So you got to make the spacecraft safe for them, and you add up the cost of this. It's the cost of 30 robotic missions. So you go to the scientist, you want to send a person or 30 different robotic missions. No scientist is going to say send the person. It's just not going to happen. Period. Okay? Not even the geologists.
Because you get a better bang for your buck with
Yes,
the robots.
it's the return, the scientific return
Right.
on the dollar.
Right.
Okay, now I put on my public hat, and I look around and I realize nobody's ever named a high school after a robot. Okay? No press ever went to the birthplace of a robot and talked to its school teacher. Right? This doesn't happen. So that there's not only that, an astronaut is the only celebrity I know where people will line up to get their autograph even if they don't even know their name in advance. It's the fact that they're an astronaut matters to people. And so there's value to that. There's political, cultural value to that. Number one. Number two, NASA has, in spite of what many of my colleagues feel about it, has never been our private funding agency for science. Right now, 70%, and that is the smallest it's ever been, 70% of NASA's budget goes to the manned program. That's the smallest it has ever been. No, so it was once 67%.
That's to the space shuttle.
Goes to Space Shuttle, Space Station, the manned program, the Houston Astronaut Training Corps, all of this.
Astronaut ice cream.
All the astronaut food and the like. It's never been less than that. The science has always been on the coattails of the manned missions. Always. The history of human discovery in the most expensive configurations of discovery there ever were has always been the science happened on the coattails of some other mission. Today is the 200th anniversary of the birth of Charles Darwin. The Beagle, the ship that he took that went to the Galapagos Islands, was not chartered by him. That wasn't, where do you want to go today, Chuck? All right? It had other mission statements, and he just piggybacked that trip. Some of the greatest science that's ever happened simply piggybacked other mission statements that had geopolitical motivation.
You know, that's how the Titanic was discovered. Do you know that story? Bob Ballard and the Titanic. He was on a research. He was on a research mission for the federal government to find the Thresher was some submarine. He had a couple of weeks left over. He had found it early. He said, "Can I borrow this? Can I borrow the equipment? It's already paid for." And he went and found the Titanic.
Because no one would have given him the money just for that. That's right. That's how that. So the reality is, the geopolitical reality is, were it not for the manned program, there'd be no science done in space. It's that simple. The history of the funding of this kind of projects indicate this. And so to say, you're wasting money, don't spend it on this, I say, just let it be what it has to be. As long as we're there on the coattails, I'm fine. So I say, send people back to the moon, onto Mars, because the science will be there right alongside it.
But there are astronauts permanently.
Anything else is sort of politically naive. That's my point.
Yeah. But right now, there are astronauts in orbit around the Earth in the space station. No one knows anything about them, pays any attention to them.
I think that's a good sign. Isn't that what we were after in the 60s, that we become such a spacefaring nation that you would no longer pay attention to it? If you knew the names of those astronauts, that meant going to space would still be like a special rare thing. The fact that you don't know their names is evidence that we are in fact a spacefaring nation. Consider that that which is your culture, you might even define it as that which you no longer recognize. That's something that you no longer pay attention to. And I did the study. And you know what occurred to me? I was in Italy, in a grocery store. And I'm walking by, I forgot what I was buying, and I pass an aisle. The entire aisle is pasta. Pasta with shapes and numbers I'd never even heard of. And I said, wow, I'm in Italy. So of course there's a whole aisle of pasta. Then I asked an Italian, is there anything in our grocery stores that strikes you this way? The way it strikes? He said, yes. We have the soft drink aisle. Nobody else has an entire aisle of soda. Nobody. But you don't even notice it, do you? It's just the soft drink aisle. You don't come up to say, damn, this is America for sure. You don't react, you don't notice it anymore? I said, is there anything else? Yes. We have, you ready for this? The ready-to-eat breakfast cereal aisle. We pioneered those two products. It is our invention. So we have entire aisles of them that we don't even notice. So I submit to you that the fact that none of us can recite the names of these astronauts is an indication that we are a spacefaring nation. And you know when you'll notice? You know how you notice? So the culture is that which you don't notice. And the way you know it's culture is if you take it away, people freak out. Dare you ever walk into a store and there's no soda aisle? There'd be a riot. No ready-to-eat breakfast cereal aisle. There'd be a riot. If people didn't care, they wouldn't notice that it wasn't there. But you know they're going to notice if that's the case. Just as when the Columbia Space Shuttle broke up coming out of orbit, the nation stopped. All TV programs got repositioned, their memorial services. Nobody complained that they couldn't see their soap operas that afternoon. And the nation regrouped to try to understand whether we need a new mission for NASA. And it's one of the times I got the call from the White House to go help and decide where NASA should go next. So I was like connected genetically with how that ultimately unfolded. But
are they still calling?
Is Obama calling, you mean?
Yes.
I'm not unknown to the Obama administration, but I'm not like looking for jobs in Washington. I'm perfectly happy here in New York. And we got a whole lot of the people climbing over each other to get there and serve in the administration there. So
Good to hear that.
yeah.
Good to hear that. You brought up an interesting...
So do you agree with me that you don't know?
Oh, well, I agree with you. I agree that no, I don't totally agree with you. I agree with you about it being part of the culture, but I think that it has to be as an adventure.
Oh, no, so that's a step. Just because you don't know their names doesn't mean...
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
You're mixing, there's an apple there and an orange there. The apple there is, we can't recite names. That doesn't mean we're not interested in space. That's apple, that's the apple. The orange is, should that be what we're doing in space? And I think we need to be advancing a frontier in space, and right now we're not doing it. Right now, we are boldly going where hundreds have gone before.
Very well put.
It's time to have every next space mission advance a space mission. And that's not going on right now. But on the books, there's the plans to do that, but it's underfunded at the moment.
Well, we're just going around in circles now, so to speak. I'm sorry, that's who I am. I don't want to get off this. This is a great topic, but I want to just go back to something you said that I found you have spoken about. I think of great interest, and I always dig up stuff about people I interview. And my producers do. If you miss any of this, ´niːl's going to be on my show tomorrow live, so you can listen again on WNYC.
They heard it all here. They don't.
Yeah, well, you wrote.
Plus, they paid a lot of money to come into this thing. I don't think they have any money left to buy the book after this. After they paid this.
You wrote an article.
And your show is free, right? You just turn on the radio.
Well, they have to pay this. Hopefully, they give money something to the radio station.
Oh, okay.
That one person who gives, it fits the demographic. 1 in 10 gives some money. You wrote an article about Darwin's 200th birthday that you brought up, and you talked about why Einstein was held up in such high regard by so many Americans, but not Charles Darwin. You remember that article?
Oh, no, I was an interview. It was MSNBC interviewed me for this.
And
it's online.
And you made a very good point about that physics is a better predictive science than biology is. It's more exact.
So, so the question was, why is it that Einstein is practically a cult icon, is embraced, and relativity is just part of what we know is there and is true, but Darwinian evolution somehow continues to get resistance from certain school boards across the country. The number one reason given for the homeschooling of children is so that the parents can bring religious principles into them that they feel should be happening in the school and is not. And so it's the number one reason for homeschooling. So in America. So I just offered that question came kind of out of the blue, so I just sort of came up with 2 reasons for it. And I didn't deeply research these, but they did resonate a little bit. One of them was that, first of all, Einstein doesn't really conflict with any literal readings of the Bible. The Bible doesn't say, thou shalt not have relativistic forces, right? And then there's relativity, and then you got to fight that, all right? There's just it's just not there anywhere, all right? Whereas it explicitly says in Genesis, God made man, okay? And then made woman out of man's rib. And this is not what goes on in Darwinian evolution. So there are issues there that people have because it conflicts directly with Scripture, and that matters to people who are fundamentalist, which, by the way, are the statistical minority among religious people in the country, but they have the biggest mouths, right? So you hear them and what they do and what they say. So their presence is much greater than their numbers would indicate. And their influence is much greater than what numbers would indicate. A second reason I gave is that physics is basically, it's the king of the sciences. And I mean that not to be brash or anything, but it's just true. No, that's just true. Physics is the foundational operations of the universe. And then you have chemistry built on those physical principles and biology built on the principles of chemistry. And so physics is at the base of that pyramid. And the power that physics grants you, the predictive power, is extraordinary. And to be able to predict B from A and C from D and sit down and watch it happen is the most powerful evidence that you know what's going on in the physical universe that you could ever put forth. Biology doesn't have sort of the mathematical rigor that physics does. And so the biological predictions are, if this continues under this radiation field, you'll get mutations that'll pass on to the... But you can't predict in advance what the mutation will be or whether it'll be harmful. And so there's more slop in there that gives people sort of... people who didn't want to believe it in the first place to sort of slip in there and say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, or, what will be the next species? And they want that, you want to be able to predict that, and they can't right now.
Right.
But they do use it to estimate what direction mutations are taking place in certain viruses. So, for example, the influenza virus, the vaccine you get from one year to the next is based on an evolutionary model of what's going on to that virus. It's not the same virus every year, because they're tracking what the changes are. So Doonesbury had a fascinating comic once where a person comes in who says, I'm fundamentalist Christian. And they said, oh, okay. All right, do you want the medicine that existed before we took the evolutionary models, and this is what you would have been given 100 years ago? Just rub this herb on your cheek, So it gives a whole list. So it gives a whole list of what medicines they might take given the religion that prevents them from taking the latest available to them.
Mm-hmm. How did you get to stay as interested in science as you are? A lot of kids start out interested in science.
Totally.
What happened to you that didn't happen to them?
I had parents that did not get in my way. They supported the interests. And let me clarify that. Allow me to clarify. If I had a nickel for every parent that said, how do I get my kids interested in science? My answer is, they're already interested in science. That's what it is to be a kid. You explore things. You look at what's under the rock. You pull pots and pans out of the cabinets and bang on them with the spoon. What's the first thing you do as a parent? Junior, stop making that racket. You're dirtying the pots and pans. And so you would spend a year teaching them to walk and talk, and the rest of their lives telling them to shut up and sit down. That's the problem. That's the problem. And so what you need to do is allow them to make the mess that is the consequence of them exploring their environment. Don't stop that. Let that go. Right now I'm researching what will be my next book called How to Raise a Scientifically Literate Child. And I have 2 kids on whom I'm experimenting, but no, it's not.
You don't want to say that in this internet world. That could be misquoted. ʻniːl Tyson experimenting on his kids, details at 11.
The electrodes didn't hurt.
Right,
they did not hurt.
Yeah. Don't go there.
No, what I mean by experimenting
It's a metaphor.
What I mean by experimenting is, by the way, I'm not here to turn them into scientists. What matters to me is science literacy. And science literacy is not memorizing how your microwave oven works. I don't care about that. That's not what matters. It's fine if you know that. That's how you know not to put your poodle in the microwave oven. So it's useful knowledge to know how your microwave oven works. But if you don't, that's not what concerns me. What concerns me is, how is your brain wired for thought? And it's the brain wiring that is the consequence of the environment in which I'm judging to be the consequence of the environment in which you're raised. And this is the experimenting I'm doing. So I'll give you just an example. In my house, I have a lot of sort of measuring things, because that's one aspect of science. People think science is what you know. Science is measurement. It's measurement. That's the source of knowledge. So I have thermometers all over and measuring tapes and things. So one of them is an instant read thermometer in the kitchen. So my son was like 7, and I'm preparing a pot of water for spaghetti. And I said, Travis, go check to see the temperature of the water. I want to know. So he goes and gets the thermometer, puts it in. Now he's got to read. It's one of these sort of dial thermometers. He's got to read what's between 70 and 80. Well, that must be like 75.
It's old-fashioned. Then.
Old-fashioned, right. No, you don't have numbers just come at you.
No
you
digital on this house.
Figure this one out,
right.
Okay? So I said, thank you, Travis. And 10 minutes go by. Could you check again? He sees us at 90 degrees. Could you check again? 120, 150. He keeps going back. Now it's a little project, right? He's doing this. He's helping me learn this. Gets to 200. I said, well, is it boiling yet? No, still not boiling. Okay, I need to know when it's going to boil. So he goes back 5 minutes later. Is it boiling yet? I said, yes, it is. Okay, so I said, check the temperature. It says, it's a little bit above 210. I said, well, can you tell me? Maybe it's 212, I think. Okay, fine, come on back. So I let the water keep boiling. I said, check it again. 10 minutes later, he goes back. Is it hotter? No. It's still 212. So I said, wow, okay. All right, that's cool. Well, we're going to put the spaghetti in now. I don't explain anything. That's not the point here. The point is he experimented and noticed that temperature on water will raise it until it hits boiling, and then it stays there. Maybe I'll get back to it later, but I just wanted that measurement to be in him somewhere. And this measurement forces them to ask questions of others. So my daughter, for example, who's a big fan moderate fan of, who's the woman with the two-color hair? Hannah Montana?
Oh, yeah.
How do you know Hannah?
Oh, yeah.
Hannah Montana, a pop.
It's got the long ponytails. No, with this.
Well,
I'm thinking of somebody else.
Okay. So Hannah Montana is a pop star. Big with like the tweens. If you're between age 10 and 13, she's the biggest star like there ever was in the history of the universe.
That's why I don't know this. My kids are Pippi Longstocking.
Okay. So I told her, I said, Miranda, I just saw a poster of Hannah Montana. It was like as big as a wall. She said, well, how big was the wall? So that's let me not call that skepticism, but let me call that not content with incomplete information, which I would submit is the consequence of always taking measurements of the world around you. So I have to say, oh, okay, well, the wall was like, it was this big and not this big. And I'm submitting to you that that's the brain wiring that I'm looking for and that I'm after. So you asked, how do you stay interested in science? I think you get out of their way and you nurture it. You don't try to prevent it. And when my daughter she was still in a high chair and she spilled milk on the table. We're trying to get her to wean her from a sippy cup to a cup with an open top. So kids barely have any coordination at this point. She's trying, but she tipped it over and it rolled across the table. I don't know about your floors, but ours are like slightly not level, right? So the water rolls. This is the east side, so you got really level stuff over here. West side stuff is anything. So the milk went between the eaves of the table. And it didn't cross the eave and go to the other eave. Right. That's kind of interesting. It just disappeared. So she then leaned over and saw it drip down. Mm-hmm. So I came back behind her and I cleaned it up, put more milk in it. Then she accidentally knocked it over again and checked it out again. I think most parents would have said, you're wasting milk, stop that, and cleaned it up and prevented the... But I view that as an experiment in fluid dynamics.
And milk is cheap, so...
And the cost of that milk, while you're saying, well, you're wasting food, first, at least in America, there's no shortage of food, first of all. So let's just remember that, okay? Yes, if you came from, like, the Depression and the Holocaust, and you have all this memory where food was really scarce, I can't fault you for resisting wasting food. However, there is no shortage of food. And if the act of the food doing this brings a lesson plan along with it, that is cheap compared with the actual cost of education out there. In fact, the president of Harvard is once, the former president, Derek Bach, quoted as once saying, if you think because people said, why does Harvard cost so much? If you think the cost of education is expensive, try the cost of ignorance.
All right.
So, so what was it? It couldn't have been more than 40 cents worth of milk. You don't even bend down and pick that up in the street.
No.
And there's a whole lesson plan. So
you're doing more?
So this research I'm doing it's about how much of a mess you can make with your house. And then you have kids who are ready for the world.
And they'll help you out doing that, making that mess.
And I got to add one other thing. One other thing. Someone said, what do you do to teach kids? They see me and they say, what more can you do to help kids get interested in science? It turns out there is nothing that I do that's ever directed towards kids. There are kids who can do it, who can read what I write.
Right.
This is very readable by practically any age. But I don't target kids. I always target adults. Always. They say, well, why don't you spend time with kids? Because kids are not the problem. I want scientifically literate adults out there because adults vote. And it's not the kids who are saying, what's my horoscope today? Young enough kids, they don't ask about horoscopes. Kids don't ask, if you're like 12 and under, they're not asking, will the world really end in 2012? They're not asking that. They're not. They're asking real questions, like how come there are no dinosaurs, and why is there a flower, and how can the worm breathe under the rock? Those are the kind of questions they're asking. Yeah. So the kids are not the problem; it's the adults. We need more scientifically literate adults.
Let's give them a break and bring up the questions. Have we got some questions from the audience? I know there are questions circulating in the audience. Little cards someplace.
I don't want to answer cards. I want to see people who ask the question.
Okay.
Can I do that? I want to feel who asked the question.
Let there be light.
Okay.
Okay, stand up, sir. First, then we'll move down this way. Yes, stand up and sign in, please.
I'm not all that bothered about whether Pluto is a planet or not. But the fact that this goes to a vote, it seems wrapped up in a democratic process, it makes all of science look subjective. And then you use the word dominate your orbit, that's a subjective term too. Everybody can argue on whether it's dominating, maybe next year it will be dominating. And so this whole debate makes me feel very unsatisfied about the whole scientific enterprise as a whole, because it seems like it's just political random. What do you think about that?
Ooh, he's fighting words.
He doesn't feel strongly about it, obviously.
Actually, if he was from Brooklyn or the Bronx, he would have said, so what do you say about that? Right, there would have been like a hand gesture.
Forget about it, you would have.
Forget about it, yeah. So it was very polite of you. Where are you from originally? Canada. So, just to calibrate your understanding, that was a really pissed off Canadian right there, okay? That's as pissed off as they get. All right, here it goes. The International Astronomical Union, the folks who created the committee and then took the vote, they actually do this all the time. Because what happens is, as on the frontier of science, you discover something, you name it, somebody else discovers something, they name it something else. Later on you find out it's the same thing, and then nomenclature gets a little confused. So every few years they tidy up the nomenclature so that we all are speaking the same language and we understand what we're talking about internationally. So they take a look at which words are working better or more widely used, and they vote on it just so that we have coherence. In the case of the word planet, it had not been defined since ancient Greece. It just hadn't been. Ancient Greece, there were 7 planets, wanderers against the background stars. Planetus means wanderer in Greek. By the way, that's an indication that they had no idea what they were doing. Hence they called them wanderers. There were 7 wanderers, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the Sun, and the Moon, to which we trace the names of the 7 days of the week. Each one of those through Roman and Norse mythologies. So Saturday comes from Saturn. Sunday comes from the sun. You sound very tentative here. Let's try again. Sunday comes from the sun. Moon day comes from the moon. That sort of thing. Copernicus comes along 2,000 years later, says maybe the sun is in the middle, and we on Earth go around the sun. Maybe that's what happened. The moon goes around Earth. So we went from 7 planets down to 5, and then back up to 6, because then Earth came in. And so a planet was just kind of maybe something that just goes around the sun. But no one formally defined it, because it wasn't a challenge. No, there was no need to challenge it. We just said it goes around the sun, fine, we're happy. 1801, we discovered a planet between Mars and Jupiter. We called it Ceres. Then we discovered 4 other planets, and then 12 others, and then 20 others. And we said, well, maybe there's something else going on here. And so the textbooks that were counting planets rising through the high teens, once that zone was re-identified as a new place with new kinds of objects, asteroid, it's the asteroid belt, the planet count went right back down again because we learned something new. So it was controversial to those who discovered what they wanted to have been planet Ceres, but clearer heads prevailed and recognized that it was a new swath of real estate in the solar system. So the IAU is just trying to have foresight about the trend lines and the discoveries. And they take a vote like they always do, but now you have some scientists who were attached to Pluto because it was a dog, in my judgment. And so, by the way, the first Kuiper Belt object discovered in the 1990s, when you think about it, was actually the second Kuiper Belt object.
Do we have a formal name for any besides numbers of these new objects?
Some have names, yeah. We have Quaoar is one, Sedna is another, and there's a bunch of others. They're named after gods from different mythologies of the past. And you know what's funny, since they're all sort of named after gods, I'm waiting for one of them just to be named God, you know? Just, if you're naming them after, there's one you've left out, like God, you know?
Or some people, Brett Favre or something like that.
Right. So here's what makes it controversial. The fact is those who got outvoted feel so strongly that they're still fighting it. And normally that wouldn't happen. So the vote was not so much a vote on science, but a vote on nomenclature.
And it's
we all agree Pluto is, we all agree with the parameters of Pluto. That's not what we're voting on.
But these opponents have not gone quietly.
They have not gone quietly. They're sending around petitions. They're going to like storm the next meeting of the IAU, which is in Brazil this year. Now, I think it's in Rio, so there might be other distractions that could buffer.
You had a question here. Yes, stand up, please.
Sure. So if there's a doubles match at the Davis Cup, let's say for astrophysics, and you pick anybody to be your partner, who would it be and why? I'm going to give you some options. You've got Brian Green. Stephen Hawking.
Brian, if it's tennis, Brian Green. Okay. I'm sorry, Steve, but if it's a tennis match, we'll put you on the sidelines. I'll play with Brian Green. I would say Brian Green. I think we are
fellow New Yorker.
We're fellow New Yorkers. He grew up on the Upper West Side. Actually, I grew up in the Bronx. But he went to Stuyvesant High School. I went to the Bronx High School of Science. We both went to Harvard afterwards. I majored in I majored in physics, but knowing I would do astrophysics. He majored in physics all the way. His books far outsold my books, unless you do something about that tonight. With whatever money you have left over after having bought your ticket to get in here. So we resonate, and he has strong educational missions. He's one of the main organizers of the World Science Festival that he holds here in New York, he and his wife. So we have enough resonance, and when you're playing in a Davis Cup doubles tennis match, you've got to know what your partner's going to do even before they know, so that you can work as a system. Rubik's Cube would not be useful in this regard.
Let me just say, you mentioned a few times tonight the word astrophysicist. What's the difference between an astrophysicist and an astronomer? Oh,
the problem is if I say astronomy, 70% of the time the person hears astrology. And so and then I got to like dig out of that. So
okay.
But apart from that, what we all do today is astrophysics. The astrophysics was born in the late 1800s when we learned we can deduce physical laws about what's going on in the universe. It's the application of the analysis of light in the form of spectra to cosmic objects, and that's the birth of astrophysics. So we're all astrophysicists, even if we use the word astronomer.
But once we get to a planet like Mars, we now have their geologists who study it. They don't need the astronomers anymore.
Well, yeah, so you put geologists there, but geo means Earth, of course, and so I'd rather they be Marsologists or something.
Marsologists, okay.
See? This is the need for new nomenclature, you see? That's how you get that.
Bring that up at that meeting, yeah. When does who? How about women? Would they be okay? When are people going to get to Mars?
I notice your accent is not from these parts. You're from Mars, yes.
It's Staten Island, I think.
Where's the accent from? South Africa. Okay. So, it's interesting because I've never heard someone from South Africa say that they're African. I was always intrigued by that. Because people from Europe say they're European or something, but you are African. Have you ever said that? No. Yeah, okay. I just thought it was just kind of cool. Try it.
Breakthroughs here tonight.
Say you're African. So when will man get to Mars? Man, actually, the origin of the word man means manual, that
Right.
we had dexterity as a species. It's only later on where sort of it became this gender split, and then people said man and woman, you know, so that meant man never meant woman in the first place, so you had to sort of work that. You know, when they said all men are created equal, when they wrote that, the intent was all people. That was the intent.
You sure?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
I just want you to go out of your expertise.
Right.
And keep you honest here, so.
There's the 3/5 clause,
That's
of course, in the Constitution.
So when are we going to get to Mars?
So Mars. So it'll be a while. It's a long trip. It's dangerous. We don't know how to bring enough survival material there to survive the length you need before you come back. So NASA has a new goal in their mission statement, and it's called ISRU, In Situ Resource Utilization, which is just code for wherever you go, try to find water there. Try to find fuel there. So you can refuel your gas tank and then fly back on what you found there. Now, this sounds weird, but in fact, we're pretty sure there's water on Mars, and the water molecule has hydrogen and oxygen, which if you separate them, you need a factory to do that, by the way, to do it in large amounts. If you separate them, put them in two different tanks, then have nozzles reconnecting them, it is an exothermic reaction. Huge amounts of energy a huge amount of energy is released, and you make rocket fuel that way. The shuttle main engine, the big orange thing, actually has two tanks inside of it. One tank is twice the size of the other. The one that's twice the size contains hydrogen. The one that's half the size contains oxygen. Two hydrogen atoms come out and bind with one oxygen atom. The exhaust is water plus energy. So the in situ resource utilization would require that either we use the resources there or have cargo ships bring it there in advance. And so I would say we're not going to get to Mars before 2030. And I'd like to be alive by the time that happens, but I don't think it's going to happen soon. I'm trying to get us at least back to the moon.
No,
The moon, by the way, happens on a news cycle. You get to the moon in 3 days, play around, come back, you're back within 2 weeks. Mars is a 9-month trip there. Then you're there for a year until the configuration of Mars and Earth is restored that allows you to come back with what we call a minimum energy trajectory. And the whole round trip is 3 years.
So they are actually studying human interactions on such a long trip, aren't they?
Yeah, and in fact, you want people who are very comfortable with each other. You know, if you look at before we ever went into space, there was a lot of science fiction written about what long duration space travel would be like. And they were concluding that if you were away from other people for a long time, that you might go crazy. And there are deep concerns about that. Until I met people who don't even want to be around other people. And I thought, well, they would make excellent astronauts, you know? Just give them books and like CDs and DVDs and just, there they go.
Rod Serling made a living on this kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
I know, yeah.
Somebody else, yes. Let me go here, then in the back. Yes, sir. Stand up, please. Yeah.
You talk rather passionately about scientific literacy and about how, in a funny sense, how easy it is to have children grow up as scientific literates. They just don't get in their way as adults. I'm reminded, certainly more than a decade ago, maybe 15 years ago, there was a professor in Philadelphia at Temple University, I think his name was John Hallos, and he wrote a series of books on innumeracy. I think he might have coined the word.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yes, he did.
You know, there's a great parallel to sort of, you know, what we're standing up for here. What he found was that, and he wasn't talking about educating children, he was talking about adults, but he found that if you sort of looked at the implicit mathematics behind the way people understood the news, make decisions, et cetera, then they were so far out to lunch as far as mathematics goes, it was
But
Right.
you've got to have teachers who will also carry that.
Right, so
don't you?
it's John Allen Paulos. He's still professor at Temple University, and he actually has a column. He writes for abc.com, and he comments on the mathematical illiteracy of the nation.
My sense is that he has, that all of his writings, although many people have read them and most of them well received, I don't think we're any less innumerate than we were before he wrote them.
Right, I agree. So what they did, yes. So he's got a series of books. His first one was, I think, therefore, I forgot.
That's a good title.
That could be, I think, therefore, I forgot.
Yeah, that's for us older people. Yeah.
That was his first book. His second book was Innumeracy, which was a New York Times bestseller. He made his book that followed that was A Mathematician Reads the Newspaper.
Right.
And then he has a couple of others after that. I'm friends with him. I'm good friends with him. And he's right. He doesn't propose solutions. He's showing us our weaknesses, our mathematical weaknesses. So he's coming to it as an observer, like almost as an anthropologist would observe a culture. I'm coming to it as an educator who's working to try to find a way to not have that happen in the first place. And part of the science literacy definitely includes numeracy, definitely includes that. It's just part of how to think. And so, I mean, we'll see. But I'm not requiring of him that he has the solution. Part of ever having a solution is knowing that it's a problem in the first place. And for us to have like headlines, local headline once had, I gave a whole talk on this, by the way, a local headline in a newspaper, I think it was the New York Post, said, half the schools in the district are below average. That's kind of what an average is, isn't it? About half below. You kind of need that, right? Otherwise, the average makes no sense at all. So that would be a mathematically illiterate journalist or a headline writer. So it's in a lot of places. And so I'm trying to solve that problem. Yeah. But I'll tell him that you complain that he's not putting up solutions. He'll be fine with it. Okay.
And I think what you're saying is that it's really the same solution.
Yes, they're linked.
Who's in the back?
Yes, because it's a wiring of the brain. It's not teaching someone math or science. It's steeping them in circumstance where thinking that way is required to solve their problem.
Yes, sir, in the back. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so obviously the interest in science ebbs and flows in society, and its attendance, political support for funding, classrooms, space programs. What do you think are the biggest drivers behind these ebbs and flows? And maybe the Pluto strategy is something that might work. What do you think?
The Pluto strategy?
I think you just created something.
Oh, I got you. I see. Well, it turns out
SpongeBob SquarePants planet.
fascinating you should bring that up, because I, an astrophysicist, in my field, in part because we're pretty organized with our nomenclature, and since Americans have dominated, there's that word domination again, he's from Canada, so he feels American domination there. It's true, right? America's like in your face all the time. I didn't say it to, I'm just saying it's real. The domination, Americans have dominated cosmic discovery in the 20th century, which was the growth of really huge telescopes, which means we got to name things. We just get to name things. And that has contributed, and since we don't have this Linnaean legacy that the biologists and chemists have, where everything needs a Latin root with a formal structure and 12 syllables, we just call it like we see it. That's all.
What he's suggesting is...
Oh, no, I'm getting it. Wait. Almost there, okay? Just listen, hear me out. Hear me out.
Sorry.
Hear me out, okay? I'm meeting him halfway.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. I
What do we
apologize.
call, what's our official term for spots on the sun? Sunspots. Our official term for big red stars, red giants. Regions of space, you fall in, you don't come out, light doesn't come out. It's a black hole. Okay? The birth of all time, space, energy, and everything. Big Bang. One-syllable words. What is the most important molecule to the biologist? Deoxyribonucleic acid. You can't have a conversation with a biologist, a chemist, and certainly not a geologist without being completely snowed over just by their lexicon. I submit to you that the accessibility of the cosmos to the public is magnified by the fact that the vocabulary is not in the way. The vocabulary is fun. No, we don't call them SpongeBob planets, but I say, what is that thing around Saturn? It's a ring. What does it look like? A ring. What's that red spot on Jupiter? It's Jupiter's red spot, okay? So the universe is hard enough. I don't want to put up a smoke screen. Think about it. You can't, what does a doctor tell you? If you have an ailment, you have a orbital contusion. Well, you got a black eye, okay? That's what that is. Why don't they just tell you that? And then you go for prescription and this pharmacist writes in cuneiform. You can't even read it. The doctor writes, only the pharmacist can read what the doctor says. It's this whole smoke screen. So I claim that this Pluto thing where the dog is, that we're kind of already there, but our vocabulary is simply accessible. And so they come beating down my door to get to learn more about the universe because it's so cool. And so there is no shortage of appetite for the cosmos in the public. And you want to know whether it's an ebb and flow? You believe it's been ebbing and flowing, but in fact it has not been. It's not. Yes, there's small blips, but overall, science funding in America has been a slow but steady upward trend ever since the end of the Second World War. Even under President Bush, who was widely regarded as being anti-science, but if you actually analyze that, if you said he's not anti-science, the person who says they are would tell you what ways he's anti-science, and they'll really only list two things: his stand on the environment and stem cells. Well, there's the whole rest of the country's science portfolio okay? How about the rest of that? In fact, the rest of that, the NIH budget tripled under Bush. Under President Clinton, the budget for NASA dropped by 25%. Historically, science funding has gone up under Republican presidents. For an interesting reason, by the way. If we have time, I'd be happy to tell you.
Sure, go for it.
But my point is that science funding has been generally on the way up. What you're probably referring to is not science funding, but the public's attitude towards it. And under Bush, since Bush nobody was ever accused him of being a deep science thinker, he was not sort of the protector of scientific thought in the nation. And so it gave a lot of top cover for non-scientific philosophies to rise up among us and try to work its way into the science classroom. But that doesn't change the fact that science funding has been there for the National Science Foundation, the NIH, the Department of Energy, and NASA. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
All right, good. Good. More questions?
Yes, sir.
I want to ask you about your statement that as a scientist, so there's really no reason to send humans into space rather than robots. It would seem to me that right now we have all our eggs in a very fragile basket.
Earth.
And yes, and whether we get hit by an asteroid, hopefully we'll learn to deflect them, or we have a nuclear war. And touching on this other gentleman's statement about numeracy, people they understood that it's when, not if. Isn't there something to be said for saving civilization and sending humans out there and learning how humans can survive in space so that we can spread civilization to other planets and maybe someday to other solar systems? Is that reasonable as you see the science now? Is that something?
I used to feel that way. Did you all hear the question? Yeah, why can't we spread our genes to multiple planets, protecting the species that way? You won't protect the individual, you protect the species. If there's a catastrophe, a virus, an asteroid, a total nuclear holocaust, that sort of thing. I used to feel that way. And then I thought a little more deeply about it. By the way, Hawking came out with just that statement recently. Hawking has reached a point where he's like not human anymore. He's like an oracle. Like if he says something, the media just rushes to him to find out what he says.
Yoda.
And then he's like Yoda. And then they report that. Smartest man in the world says it, and you'll sort of have to believe it because he's touted as the smartest man in the world. But what he said was just sort of culturally naive. He said something. He said we need to be a multi-planet species because the asteroid might come. Here's the problem. Here's the problem. You tell me if after this you don't just agree. Ask yourself, what is the relative cost in energy, effort, human capital, financial capital to ship 1 billion people to a terraformed Mars? Terraform, where you seed an atmosphere and turn it into like an oasis. 1 billion people to a terraformed Mars, or to deflect the asteroid. Now, that's what I'm saying. To move 1 billion people to Mars, or to invest heavily in biology so that you're ready to attack any virus that comes out? We're still victims of biology here. There are other things we're not victims of. We're not victims of, what are the things we can control streams now. You know, we don't have flooding the way we once did because we control streams. They're within our power to control. We don't control volcanoes. We run away from volcanoes. One day I want to come in and tap a volcano, put it in like a spigot to get the energy out, use the energy, denature the volcano, and we have a nice relationship with the forces of energy within the Earth. We're just not there yet. But whatever that is, it's got to be easier than moving 1 billion people to another planet. So that's my point. So what we should do is think about not moving people to another planet, but learning how to deflect an asteroid, get the best biology and chemistry going that there is, learn how to not have nuclear war, this sort of thing.
Global warming.
Right. I mean, I'll just say that the asteroid is just a metaphor for all things that could happen with global warming or whatever. And I wouldn't ship 1 billion people to Mars, but you send, you know...
2 very fertile people then, yes. Okay. Get this woman who just had 8 babies, send her to Mars. Right. There you go.
Yes. Over here. Yes, sir. You're not from Canada, are you?
I know, he's sitting,
No. Okay.
he's sitting next to the
trying
Canadian
keep-
guy.
Okay. Not that there's anything wrong with that. but-
Yes, it is. It's more predictive than any other science. That's the way to say it.
But then you start talking about that, what's really important about, astrophysics is classifying things into the rocky planets and gas giants and dwarf planets.
Oh, no, no, no. No, wait. That's in a field where you're learning information faster than your vocabulary can keep up with it. There comes a time when you need to sit down and then get your nomenclature straight. And that right now is happening with planets. It's not happening with galaxies. We went through this exercise 70 years ago with galaxies. So I'm not saying that's our reason for existence in astrophysics. I'm just saying right now that's what's going on a side part of the people studying the solar system.
But it seems like what's really interesting, what we keep talking about is classifying things and talking about like, well, these are red giants, these are terrestrial planets.
I think that's the least interesting thing.
But that's what we keep talking
No, because there's a book here there's a whole, that's why, I mean, it's because that hit the news. I don't care. But in fact, the last comic here, look, you get me started here. Look, there's like comics and stuff in here that we got permission to put in. The last comic here, okay? This is the last comic. It's on the very last page, okay? Newsflash. This is a newsflash like from Earth, rising up. And this is Pluto, and with a little voice bubble above Pluto responding to this. Newsflash. Now Pluto is not a planet. Read Pluto's reaction.
Like I'm supposed to give a... Can't read the last word of this audience here.
So classifications are just to help us communicate. That's not what science is about. Science is about understanding phenomena. Go on.
But still, on all points in science and what we talk about and what we learn is still
It is not about classification. I swear to you, it's not. The classification is a step towards understanding something else that's going on. We classify things because our mind is too feeble to actually understand what's going on. So we have to say, okay, this kind of looks like that. Let's hold that together until we can know something better. And so don't ever think that classification is science. It is not science. It's a means to understanding the natural world, not the object of what it is to understand the natural world. So I can't agree with what you're saying, but I'll let you finish now.
If we're talking about the fact of understanding, the fact of classifying things, it seems like classifying something in biology or classifying something in chemistry or classifying something in physics is all the same sort of classifying.
You mean like the periodic table, like the phyla, all those sorts of things?
So why is physics the king of science if we're just classifying all these different types?
Because we're not just classifying. You just created an entire false construction and then asked me to like explain why it's that way. Physics classifies particles. There's leptons, there's baryons, there's so everybody's got to classify something. Otherwise you can't have a conversation with somebody. But it's not the goal. The goal is to understand what nature is doing, how it behaves, to predict. That's the true understanding of what's going on. And so it's the king of the sciences because it predicts better than anybody else has ever dreamt possible. I can use laws of physics and tell you the instant the sun will rise above your horizon. I can tell you what time a total solar eclipse will happen 3,000 years from now and in what neighborhood it'll take place in. I can tell you what solar eclipse was. I can even postdict. I can tell you what solar eclipse stopped a battle that was taking place in Troy, that because it was reported that there was a total solar eclipse, I can know what eclipse that was, how long that eclipse lasted, and verify whether or not they actually had accurate retelling of what they saw.
If they sell T-shirts there.
That has nothing to do with classification. None of it.
Yes, ma'am. Stand up, please.
I didn't mean to yell at you.
He has no off button, so don't, That's the good thing.
Hello.
Among the few hats you tell us, and the one hat is as a science activity.
Yes, it is.
The question is, what do you think? A few years ago, I read newspaper. They had the debates regarding the religious creation of the mankind versus the evolution.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing she's not from Canada.
Right, not from Canada. Okay, so you heard the question. What's my thinking about the debate that was going on between evolution and a biblical creation? And that debate typically took place in the school systems where school boards would try to influence the science curriculum, although it would spill out into the blog sphere and other places where people liked to debate this. You should consider just some simple facts. Simple facts. No one in the history of religious literature has ever, based on their readings of religious literature, made an accurate prediction of a testable phenomenon that was not previously known at the time of that literature. Okay? So in other words, what you find in religious texts is that there's an account of what sort of is known. Then, I'm referring to about the physical universe. If you look at let's take the Judeo-Christian, the Old Testament, the Torah, for example. If you look at Genesis, which is an account of things, until science made independent discoveries of the account of things, people would use Genesis as their source of the account of things. In every single case, they got it wrong. Out of Genesis and the Bible in general, Earth is flat. It's land in the middle, surrounded by water. The sky is like the stars are these little things embedded in this surface. This is how everyone universally interpreted the physical universe based on Scripture. Science comes along and said, no, that's just false. And so over time, the Bible became less and less used as a science textbook by enlightened religious people, and more used as just a source of spiritual fulfillment and spiritual enlightenment. So today, non-fundamentalist religious people will cite the Bible as a source of their spiritual fulfillment, and they're not getting their science out of the Bible because they know better, because those attempts simply fail. Had they been successful, it's not through any lack of trying. For centuries, people tried to get science out of the Bible. It simply fails.
Darwin tried.
Okay? It just doesn't work.
Darwin started with the Bible.
They all do. Exactly.
With Galapagos, he was
Trying to make it work. You just can't make it work. It doesn't make it. Even Leonardo tried. Okay? He noticed that there were fossilized shells in the mountaintop, long regarded as the evidence for the flood. Okay? But he noticed that the shells were just sort of carefully laid down there. They were not sort of in a jumbled mess. He said if there were a flood, there should be floodwaters and all these fossils would be mixed together. But look at these. They're all laid down. And so he started questioning the flood story. This is Leonardo. We're talking, when was he? The 15th century? So, 16th century? So it just simply doesn't work. So therefore, it does not belong in the science classroom because it is simply not science. We live in a pluralistic society. It doesn't mean you can't teach it. It just doesn't belong in the science classroom. Any more than the scientist should run by the Sunday school and knock on the door to tell the preacher what to teach. There's no tradition of scientists doing that. There's no tradition of scientists picketing outside of churches and synagogues saying that might not necessarily be true. It doesn't happen that way. We live in a nation that protects freedom of religion, so practice your religion. No one's stopping you. That's one of the great things about this country. But just because you have a religion doesn't make it correct science. Accept that fact. Otherwise, you will undermine the scientific enterprise that is the greatest engine of economic growth culture has ever seen. In fact, I did 3 tours of duty in the Bush administration. So I saw what was going on. This was very eye-opening, by the way. Okay, I was appointed by the president. All right, appointed by him. So I'm in there and I'm watching this go on.
In where? So when you say tours of duty.
Okay, so one was I served on a presidential commission to study the future of the aerospace industry in America, which was on hard times. They'd lost 500,000 jobs in the previous 15 years. And it was worried how it would affect transportation, security, and commerce.
I get the idea. Okay.
Next one was on the commission to study the future of NASA after the Columbia tragedy.
Right.
A third appointment was to select who would be awarded the Presidential Medal of Science. Okay? Okay. Now, so these are nonpartisan appointments. They're just trying to do good in the world. But I was sort of baptized into a world I had not seen. The Republicans were everywhere. Here in New York, it's like there's a Republican right there. Everyone turn around and see that Republican right there. In New York City. Now, you got more of them over here in the East Side, I understand, but still, it's not like Colorado or something.
Indiana.
Or Indiana or Idaho, right? So, I'm there, and there was the Dover, Pennsylvania court case where intelligent design was on trial. This is the movement where the religious community would say there are things in the world that are so intricate and so beyond scientific account that they must have been enabled by a higher intelligence than the human mind. It's called intelligent design, a way for accounting for things that you don't understand. They wanted to get that in the science classroom. Never mentioning the word God, because that would be the crossing of church and state, and so this was kind of a subterfugal way to get God in the classroom. The judge presiding over that trial was a Bush-appointed judge. This is a school board trying to get intelligent design in the public schools. All of my sort of liberal Democrat friends said, this is going to go badly. And I said, Bush appointed him. It's a Republican judge. It's not going to go badly. I was cool. I just sat back, watched it unfold. In the end, the judge kicked it out of court, said intelligent design is not science, has no place in the science classroom, and wrote like a 130-page brief. I guess you wouldn't call it brief at that point. 130-page. Sure, there are lawyers in here.
Megillah, I think it's.
Megillah, is that right?
That's it.
Are you sure?
Exactly.
Megillah, like Megillah.
The whole Megillah.
The whole. Really?
Yeah.
Is that the
Very
official
chem-
word?
Yeah.
Like Megillah the gorilla?
That's right. You don't spend enough time on the West Side.
I'm sorry. Okay. So, it was a 130-page account that makes actually a fascinating decision.
Opinion, decision.
Both, all of the above. 130-page lesson plan, basically, on what science is and what it isn't. And there are schools now using that in their science classroom. It's a brilliant account. Okay? Now, why did I know that would happen? Why did I know? I'll tell you why.
I'm waiting.
I'll tell you why. Because the reason why science funding is higher under Republicans is because while the Republican will be resistant to spending money, this is how the stereotype goes, and it is largely true, but you can argue it on the edges. A Republican might be resistant to creating a social program in the service of needy people. They're more likely to invest in industry to boost a capitalist system that might create a job base that then the people would take on. So this is the difference here, okay? Which means Republicans compared to Democrats are much more likely to put money in places that would later on make more money.
Banks.
Okay?
Oh.
No. Like
Came over me.
the R&D of a corporation. Oil, this sort of thing. So, a Republican judge, one thing I learned above all else, whatever else is true about a Republican, they do not want to die poor. And if you allow intelligent design into the science classroom, you will undermine the foundations of science education in America. And that would be the beginning of the end of all we have taken for granted about our economic strength as a nation. So I knew he couldn't possibly decide that without jeopardizing his entire investment portfolio. That's how I knew.
All right,
Meanwhile, Bush has to carry on that way because his electorate feels that way, and that's who put him into office. But judges aren't elected, not that one. He's appointed. So that gives him the freedom to do things that have nothing to do with the opinion of voters. There's the politics of it.
One more question I have time for.
We got one in the front row right here.
Go ahead. Stand up, give your question.
Is that the best you can say? Go ahead? Can you like make a whole sentence?
Please.
Thank you. Okay. But first, how old are you? 9 years old. Cool. I was 9 years old when I had my first visit to the Hayden Planetarium, and I was starstruck. And I've been interested in the universe ever since. 9 years old. So go for it.
Do you think that America is more interested in Pluto the dog than Pluto the planet? If they gave Pluto, if Pluto the planet was named something else, people wouldn't have fought for it to still be a planet as much?
Did you hear that in the back row? So the question, thank you for that question. First, do I think Americans care more about Pluto the dog than Pluto the planet? And had Pluto been named something other than Pluto, would Americans have cared as much as we do? That's an excellent question. Let's back up in time a bit. Let's go back to mid-1700s. I got the years correct in the book. At a point when Sir William Herschel, a British astronomer, very famous, brilliant, had the biggest telescope of the day. If you got the biggest telescope, you see things other people don't see because they don't have a telescope like yours.
I want one.
He discovered a new planet. No one had ever discovered a planet before. No one. Ever. There was Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. He discovered a new planet. So he was going to name it. He was going to name it. What do you name? No one ever discovered a planet before. So there are no rules for naming. So he did what any good scientist would do and named it after his principal funder, the person who gives him money. So that was King George. So for about 50 years, textbooks showed Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and George. Now, I don't know
He's
about...
only 9. Don't do this.
No. So I don't know about, but I'd be deeply disturbed by a planet named George, right? So clear heads eventually prevailed, and they said, okay, wait a minute. The other planets, they're named after Roman gods. This ought to be a Roman god. But that would get the British very angry, who are the most powerful force the world had ever seen, economically, culturally, militaristically, and everything else, Lee, yes. So you don't want to get them angry. So as a consolation, as a sort of, all right, how do we not get them more angry with us than they already are for yanking the king's name off of the planet? They said, all right, we'll make an exception for the moons, because while planets are named for Roman gods, the moons of planets are named for Greek characters in the life of the Greek counterpart to the Roman god after whom the planet is named.
Wow.
So for example, Jupiter, one of its moons is Ganymede. Ganymede is the manservant of Zeus, and Zeus is the Greek counterpart to Jupiter. So that's how that works. So that's our homage to Greek and Roman legends and the role that they played in sort of trying to map the solar system. Now, the exception to Uranus, it was ultimately named Uranus, the exception there is that its moons are not named for Greek gods. They're named for fictional Shakespearean characters.
Oh my God.
And since Shakespeare is British, that was a way to just sort of...
SpongeBob hasn't got a chance.
It doesn't have a chance.
No.
So you have moons like Portia, not Porsche like the car, but Portia, P-O-R-T-I-A, Oberon, Puck, Titania, Miranda, name of my daughter.
Had a lot of moons, too, didn't they?
Not a lot of moons, but Shakespeare had a lot of characters.
That's it.
The Greek gods had a lot of characters. They led complicated social lives. There's no shortage of characters to name them after. So the names of planets, first they would have to be a Roman god. So the question is, if it was a Roman god that did not share the name of a cartoon character, would anyone have cared? I am certain that that would have been the case. In fact, Americans could not have named Pluto Pluto. You know why? It was named by a British girl, 11-year-old girl in England who was well connected. Her father ran the Cambridge Library, and he was friends with the Astronomer Royal. Totally connected, 11-year-old girl. In America, no one could have possibly come up with the word Pluto, because at the time, there was a widely advertised mineral laxative. Ask your mom what laxative means. Called Pluto water, with the slogan, "When nature won't, Pluto will." So you discover a new planet, nobody's thinking bathroom, okay? They're not. They want to think something else. So Americans would have not come up with Pluto. Had they come up with some name like...
Goofy? Was Goofy around there?
Goofy, right. That would have been fun. Goofy. Donald, Goofy, Mickey. So I am certain that had it been named something else, that Americans would not have linked to it at all. And pick up another, how about, think of another Greek name. How about, who's the guy who looked at his reflection? Narcissus. Suppose it was named Narcissus. You know, kids can barely even pronounce that. That would have been lost long ago. It would have not happened. I'm sure of it. And so, plus, like I said, it's not just because it's little. We got littler things in the solar system. It's not just because it's icy. We've got other icy things. It's not because it's the farthest. I mean, because sometimes it's not even the farthest. So none of those arguments really hold water, I don't think. That's why I blame it all on Disney. And there's the whole tracing of if you care, all the Disney, the origin of Pluto in the Disney pantheon is in here. And what disturbed me, can I end with that? I know you weren't trying to end here, but I got to get it off my chest. And you might be curious, how is it that a mouse, Mickey, can own a dog? Why is it that Pluto is Mickey's dog,
Wow.
but Mickey is not Pluto's mouse? Have you ever wondered? I was deeply disturbed by this. This is a disruption in the mammalian order of things.
Wow.
So I looked this one up.
Wow.
I got Disney consultants.
Yeah.
I checked this out.
Yeah.
You know how you can do this? In the Disney pantheon of characters, not the ones that they bought later, like Winnie the Pooh. I'm talking about ones that they sketched out of their labs. If you're an animal who wears clothes, you can own other animals who don't. Mickey's got the gloves, those balloon pants he wears, whatever those things are.
Wow.
Pluto's butt naked, walks on all fours and barks. Whereas Goofy wears clothes, walks bipedally, pays rent, lives in a house, not a doghouse. And I know you were burning to know this, but I just had to tell you. That's how that.
And there's more of that good stuff in this book, The Pluto Files, The Rise and Fall of America's Favorite Planet. Put it over there.
Thank you.
Thank you all. ʻniːl will be on Science Friday tomorrow at 3 on WNYC. If you want anything we didn't cover tonight, I don't know how we'll get to that, but thank you all for coming tonight.
And we're
Have
doing
a
books
safe one.
outside, I guess.
Books outside.